of us don't go through the suffering because we don't see the worth in what God has given us. And that is a trick of the enemy, trying to convince you that what God gave you doesn't have any value. The treasure is still there. Even when this earthen vessel has been damaged, Paul says, I still have something to say, even in the midst of my suffering. There is no devil in hell that can come up against what God has placed in my spirit. God is backing you up, and there are communities depending on your yes, that your family is depending on your breakthrough. God says, no, I'm going to sit Paul right in the middle of an intersection in which two cultures that are extremely different will converge as a result of who Paul is. Because he's a Pharisee, he is a Jew, he is a devout Jew, so devout that he is willing to kill anyone who believes in Jesus. But he gets a revelation of who Jesus is, and Jesus says, I'm going to use Paul to not just reach the Jews, but he's also going to reach the Gentiles. These are two very distinct cultures, but Paul has been called to live in an intersection that would allow him to touch both Jew and Gentile, because he's living at an intersection. I think this is important for many of you who have been called to things that are outside of the box. The Jews and the Gentiles, I mean, you guys are theologians. I'm just a freshman. You all understand that to even be in contact with a Gentile was to defile who you were as a Jew. And for some reason, God says, I'm going to use Paul to spread the message of Jesus to the untouchables that he once was touching. I wish I could say this the way that I studied it. These two cultures, all of these letters that we see Paul write in the New Testament are letters to Gentiles and sometimes to Jews, teaching them how they're going to live in the tension of these two cultures coming together. God gave me this text because he told me that there are some leaders in 2024 who were called to the intersection of competing cultures. This man is a preacher from the hills of West Virginia. Why is he sitting up here with government officials and civil rights leaders when we're supposed to have the separation of church and state? Because sometimes God places you in an intersection with two competing cultures because you're going to be the gateway that he uses to expand the kingdom in both directions. Science and entertainment, faith and mental health, white and black churches, brown and yellow churches, boomers and millennials. God sat me right in the middle of an intersection because we need one another to expand the kingdom of heaven, and we can no longer afford to be separated from things that have influence in the world when we are the kingdom called to take over the world. That means somebody is going to be sitting in an intersection that doesn't make sense to anybody, but it makes sense to them because God knows what he gave them to work with. That means that somebody is going to have to say yes to the tension. The tension of trying to fulfill God's vision in two cultures that don't make sense. I am the church, but I can't just talk to the church because we done enough talking to each other. Somebody got to get in an intersection and be the church and grab the drug dealers. Somebody got to get in the intersection and be the church and change policy. Somebody's got to get in the intersection and say, yes, I am the church, but I'm also going to change entertainment. Somebody's got to sit in the intersection. Yeah. I can't take my time, it's late. Listen. No, it's late. When I was studying this text, I found it very interesting that Paul receives a very unique start to his journey at living at the intersection of Jews and Gentile coming together. There are a few things that you already know because you've already preached this 18,000 times that I would like to submit for your consideration. He starts off blind. He receives this revelation, and we know that he's going to live in this intersection, and God, Jesus, says that in order for him to fulfill this mission, I've got to start him the right way. He starts him blind. Blind. Blind? I can't see. I can't even see how I'm supposed to do this. Jesus. Is anybody at an intersection and you just can't see how you're supposed to do this thing? Jesus starts him off blind. He needs to be blind though, and so do you, because you can't be distracted by what you see, and you got to see it in your spirit before you can see it outside of you. He was blind on one hand, but on the other hand, he was at an intersection. Because though I cannot see with my natural eyes, my spirit is more alive than it's ever been. I came to preach to somebody and let you know that when you leave Dallas, Texas, that your spirit is going to be more alive than it has been in years. I came to preach to somebody who's gotten distracted by what you see. I want to let you know that the only way you can start it is if you're willing to start blind. If you're willing to say, I will not walk by sight, I can only walk by faith. I hear God saying, I'm going to show it to you in the spirit realm. I'm going to show it to you in your belly. I'm going to show it to you in your dreams. I'm going to show it to you. You're going to daydream about this thing. Spirit of the living God, I pray that you would open their eyes, not their natural eyes, but that their spiritual eyes would be awakened, that they would see the intersection you placed them in. I may not see it with my eyes, but I see it with my spirit. I may not see it with my eyes, but I see it with my spirit. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I get joy when I think about it, because my spirit sees something that my eyes can't comprehend. I see it in my spirit. I'm trying to be... He starts off blind. He starts off being guided. Acts 9 verse 7 says to me, and the men who journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no one. These are the men who would eventually guide him to Ananias. He's blind, but he's also being guided by people who may not see it, but they hear it. There are some people who will not see the vision, but they'll hear the vision when you express it from your lips. And when you express that vision from your lips, I hear God saying that I'm going to call people to you who will help guide you to where I'm taking you. Don't worry about whether or not they see it. Just recognize whether or not they can hear it. Can you hear it? Because if you can hear it, don't worry about it. I got the sight. It's not for you to see. I'm the leader. I'm the only one who can see it. But if you can recognize the sound, that sound will give you the faith you need. Because faith comes by hearing, and hearing from the word of God. I don't need you to see it, I need you to hear it. And if you can't hear it, I gotta move on to the next. That's why you gotta speak it. So many of you are so afraid of failing that you won't speak it, but you cannot find the people who will guide you unless you are willing to speak it. If you are willing to speak what you see, God says, I'll bring you people who can guide you to where you need to be. Paul did everything the right way. And he gets down to the end when he should be finishing strong. And now he doesn't know whether or not he can even add value in the way that he's used to adding value. Now he doesn't even know what his legacy will be or if he will have one at all. Suffering of knowing that you're so far from where you should be, but tired, like you're already there. That's suffering. When you know I'm not there yet, but I'm tired because I've been fighting my whole life, and there is so far away. The suffering that keeps us from finishing strong. You see, this is why some of us don't get to see success, is because the suffering is enough to stop you in your tracks. I'm building it, but nobody's coming. I'm saying it, but it's causing more friction than it is causing change. I'm speaking it, but nobody's listening. And it's one thing to just take it on the chin and try to be logical. But if we're honest, we have normalized suffering so much that we don't even give it language. We just say that's the breaks. But if we were to be honest and admit just for a moment that I'm suffering. The church is thriving, but the family is suffering. The business is thriving, but the church is suffering. But suffering has an intersection. If you read all of Acts, you'll see that Paul could have ended this suffering at any time. As a Roman citizen, it was illegal for them to treat him the way that they were treating him. But Paul was so committed to finishing strong that he didn't just throw out the Roman citizenship card the moment that he began to suffer. He continued to suffer until he got to a place where he could release what God had given him to say. Oh, I wish I could say this better. You'll notice that in Acts 21, that when I ended my text, it begins to tell us what Paul was about to say. He's at an intersection where he's got suffering. And he could make a choice to just let the suffering silence him, or he could dare to speak in the face of suffering. And if he dares to speak in the face of suffering, he will release what God has placed on the inside of him. And for Paul, that was worth the suffering. You see, some of us don't go through the suffering because we don't see the worth in what God has given us. And that is a trick of the enemy, trying to convince you that what God gave you doesn't have any value, or the value has been tainted because of what you have gone through. But if God gave it to you, I want you to know that he does not discount what he gave you. If God gave it to you, I want you to know that we have this treasure in earthen vessels. That means the treasure is still there. Even when this earthen vessel has been damaged, Paul says, I still have something to say, even in the midst of my suffering. Can I tell you, I'm finished. I see that the way he starts is very similar to how he finishes, because he is blind to what is happening around him. All that matters is what God has placed on the inside of him. I hear God saying that if you are in this season of your life where you're wondering how you're going to finish and how do you make it to the finish line, I want you to know that you got to finish the same way that you started. You got to be blind to what's happening around you and eyes wide open to what God is doing on the inside of you. He's being carried by soldiers. Sometimes you're going to have to let some people guide you. Sometimes you're going to have to let some people carry you. And then he is covered, because sometimes you got to let God cover cover you. In seasons where you're even suffering, he recognizes that this looks very much like what God said it was always going to be. So all I have to do is maintain the start that God has given me. If you're going to finish strong, go back to how you started. If you're going to finish strong, you got to go back to protecting how it started in the first place. What mattered, what didn't. How excited were you? When we're talking in marriages and they're having hard times, we ask them, let's talk about how it started. And we know that 9 times out of 10, if we ask you about how it started and you roll your eyes, y'all in a little trouble. Because how you start, if you can just get back to how it started, if you can just get back to that innovation, if you can just get back to that excitement, if you could just get back to how it started, then you can figure out how to finish strong. Strong in your spirit. We serve a time where strength has been hijacked by the idea that it comes in numbers and impact. No, I'm talking about finishing strong in your spirit. I want to pray with you. God told me as I was preparing for this message that what Paul wanted to give more than anything was the gift of his suffering. We know this because scripture tells us in Philippians 3 that all he wanted was to know him and the power of his resurrection. We all want to know the resurrection. But he said, I also want to know the fellowship of his sufferings. Can I just say, there are generals in this room. And I recognize literally I am a grasshopper to a general. That's not self-deprecation, it's true. Because I've seen so many of you since I was little girls. And I want you to understand that you did not give your life, give your bodies, give your families for a generation that just wanted your resurrection. That there are some of us who want to offer you the gift of our suffering too. I wish I could say that better. When I look at the intersection of boomers and millennials and Gen Z, I recognize that right now this transaction that's happening between boomers and millennials is so critical. It is a delicate walk. Because I'll be honest, we are a generation that we're seeking the mental health. We don't want to experience trauma, and that is very much so true. I have a trauma therapist. But I am not so intent on avoiding suffering that I don't recognize that in order to be effective at this, I have to be willing to suffer for the sake of the gospel. I am not disillusioned by that. And I want you to know that we saw your suffering. That I know that it cost you. I saw my father this morning paying the price to stand on this platform, suffering. I was a little girl taking his shoes off of his swollen feet. His feet so swollen we couldn't get them off, but he was still going out, preaching to some of you, getting you through some of your families while I was pregnant, while our family was going through it, because he recognized that sometimes in order to be effective, you don't get to choose whether or not you suffer. But even though I'm suffering, I'm still going to speak what God told me to speak. And I'm telling you that if we are going to master passing the baton, that we have to recognize that they're going to pass the suffering too. That you could do everything right and you might still suffer. But my assignment was to tell you that suffering has an intersection. And that intersection is glory. When Peter is first positioned to be the rock in which Jesus is going to build his church on, he initially thinks that he is only called to the lost sheep of Israel. He's only called to those who are of Jewish heritage. That means that his distinction, his focus in what he is doing in the earth has one specific group. This moment in the text, though, is when God takes that vision, that initial focus, and begins to expand it to make room for the next dimension of what God wants to do. God doesn't give us the full detail on the plan that he has for our lives. God only gives us hints. He only gives us clues. Sometimes God only gives us enough to get it started, because if he gave us the full details, we would say no and never get moving. But sometimes he says, I'm just going to give you enough to get you in position so that you're too far ahead of where you used to be to go back, and you can't stay stuck there, because he's created an appetite for transformation. You see, there are some people in this room who are in this room because they have an appetite for transformation. I got a taste of what God could do. I got a taste of what can happen when I let God use me. I got a taste of what could happen when I surrendered myself. And so now I can't go back. Now I'm hanging on every word that proceeds out of his mouth, because every word that proceeds out of his mouth is my instruction for what I need to do next. Peter's further out than he ever thought he would be. And for him, that is promotion. For him, that is growth. Oh God, there's somebody in this room, and you're already further out than any member of your family has ever been. And for someone, you should be satisfied with where you are. But God keeps giving you vision that there's something else left. There's something more connected to who you are. I know everyone else would be satisfied if they made it this far, but I'm crazy enough to believe that God left me in this world because there is yet more for me to do. And I